Okay, so welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the TELCoP, I want to say the third TELCoP for 2022, where we're continuing to talk to people about various different topics related to technology enhanced learning. And I don't know if Michael knows this, but our theme this year appears to be two things. Number one, Sydney academics. Michael Blumenstein, who's here today, is from University of Technology, Sydney. Carmen Vallis last week was from USyd, and then Camille was from UTS. So apparently this year it's all Sydney academics. And then our other theme is whether or not we should continue to have lectures, which I think we mentioned to Michael when we saw him last time, but this is something that's kind of come up. And Carmen was very much against lectures, and then Camille was a little bit more on board with the idea of lectures. And so it'll be maybe interesting to find out where Professor Michael Blumenstein lands on that question as well. But I've mentioned his name a couple of times, and so I'm going to do the official introduction and let you know thank you for coming to this meeting. And we are here today, as I said a couple of times already, with our guest speaker, who is Professor Michael Blumenstein, who is the Deputy Dean, Research and Innovation at the University of Technology, Sydney. He's had an upgrade since last I saw him. He was an Associate Dean, now he's a Deputy Dean. He's working his way up. So that's what we're up to today. And as always for 2022, I do want to start with an acknowledgement of the traditional owners of the lands that we're meeting on. And as I always say, because we're across all of Australia, this is a wide variety of different traditional owners. And so I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of all of the lands that we're on across Australia, indeed maybe across the world, past, present and emerging, and pay my respects to those elders. And here on the Gold Coast, which is where Michael's from originally, that's the Ugambeh people, but if you're a Brisbane based like I am, Brisbane campus, then that's the Jagera and the Turrbal people. And if you'd like, you can type in the lands that you're on in the chat if you're interested in letting us know where you are, both in modern day speak as well as the traditional lands as well. So as I've mentioned a couple of times, our guest speaker is Michael, and I'll show you a photo of Michael in a sec. But as always, I start by reminding you that this is the Technology Enhanced Learning Community of Practice. I'm not going to read all of these slides. I just usually throw them up there to let you know that this is the TELCoP, to give you some ideas of what the TELCoP is and what it does. But it's basically about it sharing that technology enhanced learning practice across CQ University particularly, but also we sometimes get people from other places as well. And we do also share this recording on YouTube, and I've started sharing it on my podcast as well. So you may find that other people are listening to it, which I guess is also an advisory for you. If you're thinking about swearing, Michael, maybe not so.
I'll be careful.
Yes, well, I can't talk really. Okay, so what are we going to do today? We're going to do what we usually do, what we've been doing for the TELCoP for about 18 months, which is sort of an interview style session, a Q&A style session. And the way that it works is that Robert, who is my co-conspirator in the TELCoP, along with Daryl Clare, Robert has some pre-prepared questions for Michael that he's going to run through. And then if you have questions for Michael, then you can type them into the chat. And what I will do is I will moderate the chat and make sure that any of those questions get asked. And I'll stick my hand up for Robert's benefit, and then he can throw to me. And what we find is that works really well. We get a combination of those pre-prepared questions as well as some on off-the-cuff style questions as well. And then, of course, as we go along, if you do want to sort of voice a question, you can do that as well. Just let us know via the chat, and we'll give you an opportunity to speak if you'd like. But that's the basic format. And we tick-tock backwards and forwards. Sometimes I'm the interviewer, sometimes I'm the moderator. Today, I am the moderator, and your interviewer is Dr. Robert Vanderburg, who is a senior lecturer here at CQ University in education. His discipline area particularly is educational psychology. He's heavily involved in the scholarship of learning and teaching here at CQU, or the awards program, the grants program, various other things. And it's particularly notable because in 2021 was awarded a Universities Australia AAUT citation for outstanding contributions to student learning, and is also, like me, a CQ University Opal Award winner. And the most exciting part about the Opal Award is that you actually get an Opal, which is, yeah, always nice. We don't have them anymore, I don't think, but you know, It's nice to have that physical thing.
I think we were the last ones.
We may have been the last ones. That's right.
We
and then
took the opal.
That's it. They ran out of opals. That's right. Yeah. As I always throw in a little bit of a silly comment at the end. Robert is an avid fitness nut. Always takes his bicycle wherever he's going. Even if we go to a conference, it's crazy, right? You know, taking the bicycle, but he does. And is also a committed Bundaberg native. If you've ever been to Robert's house, he has like curtains and walls painted with Bundaberg rum. It's absolutely bonkers. Maybe not that bad, but he is certainly a committed Bundaberg native. And then just in case you don't know who I am, I'm sure you all do, but this is me. I'm Associate Professor Michael Cowling. There's my bio on the slide. If you don't know me because I won an award last year for teaching excellence in physical sciences, then you might know me as Professor Tech, which is my secret superhero alias. You can see Professor Tech on the pillow behind me there. And he's what the kids know me as, the K-12 kids, as I go and do various different training, including, and this is a plug, World Science Festival, which I'm going to later this week in Townsville in the sunny north. And so it's going around regional Queensland over the second half of 2022. So keep an eye out. It might be, if you're in Gladstone or Bundaberg or Chinchilla or Ipswich, no, not Bundaberg, I don't think, Chinchilla, Ipswich, then there might be a WSF heading your way. But
you might want to check the north, Michael. It's not sunny.
Oh, okay. The sunny north. Well, that was metaphorically speaking, the sunny north. Yes, that's what I've heard. Yeah, graduation today in Townsville as well. And Helen was telling me that it's not particularly sunny. But our guest speaker, the man of the hour at the moment, is Michael Blumenstein. And there is his bio. I think I updated it, Michael, Deputy Dean, Research and Innovation. I've known Michael Blumenstein for a long time, maybe like 30 years or so.
Wow.
Yeah. I remember him when he was just a casual lecturer at Griffith University, but has worked his way up as a professor at GU and then is now at UTS as well. And so he's going to come and talk to us a little bit about learning and teaching, and in particular, as per the title, computer science education plus, right? So how is it that he sees that we teach computer science education? And I usually try and look for a silly photo of somebody on the internet, and I found this one on the right-hand side, which is Michael with his lovely family, who some of which I've met, some of which may not have been born when we first met Michael. But as well as that, just to give you a more serious photo, there's our guest speaker, Michael, there. And I love this one here, sitting in front of the screen with the fuzzy sort of out of focus, slightly bokeh effect that they've got going on.
You know where that was, Michael, don't you?
Was that at GU?
It was. It was in the CAV lab, formerly known.
Oh, the CAV lab. Oh, I remember that lab. There you go.
The biggest screens on campus at the time.
Oh, there you go. Okay, so without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to hand over to our interviewer, Robert, and he is going to have a chat to our guest speaker, Michael. So take it away, Robert.
Hello. Crazy, you know, the weirdest stressor is when you're doing these things from home, you might get mail, but I did. My Australian passport just came in the mail 2 seconds ago. So that was interesting. So, but back to our thing, I don't want to sidebar, but it's always nice to get new things. So Michael, as a DDR, you know, there is sort of this traditional researcher teacher bipolarity, which can be problematic. So we're going to pull your researcher brain into our teaching and learning world. Would you mind give us sort of a brief pedagogy perspective for you as you know, as a DDR, or just as you as a person, but like what do you view your pedagogy perspective as?
Well, you know, I suppose previously to the roles that I have now, I was the head of School of Computer Science in, well, sorry, it was called the School of ICT at Griffith, and then the head of School of Computer Science, but formerly called the School of Software, believe it or not, which was the shortest name for a school at UTS when I took that on. I thought it was actually pretty neat. So that was probably the time when I had most of my interactions around, you know, the teaching and learning focus, because we, at that time, I was able to develop the first the first computer science program with the team, with the teaching and learning team in the school at UTS. Actually, and probably when I was at Griffith as well, the first computer science degree as well at Griffith. So, and the precept of that was always around ensuring that there was a lot of interaction with students and industry. And so the approach was really sort of trying to drive the connection with industry and ensuring that there was a pathway to employment, but at the same time without not having any sacrifice on quality. And you may be aware that in computer science degrees, you do have to get accreditation from what's called the Australian Computer Society. And so these are all IT degrees. And so there are some sort of precepts in there that really need to, be looked upon as things that have to be in the program. So, for example, ethics, which not surprising, a certain amount of industry capstone or internship or industry type subjects in there, and using that as a very broad guide. I think at the end of the day, the degrees we always had and the approach to computer science has always been with the fact that you have to enhance the undergraduate candidate from when they entered, and ensure, so in other words, what the outcome is much better than what came in, and two, that they actually are ready for the big bad world. And what's interesting is that there's a lot of talk at the moment that, I don't know if you saw the recent AIIA, the Australian Information Industry Association report with the technology, I can't remember, there's just so many technology associations, the Tech Council. And what they're saying, they're pointing the finger at all universities, saying that there is not enough skilled people ready to undertake work straight out of uni. And, that's a bit of a head scratcher, because university shouldn't only be about just being ready for work. There are things that you have to learn so that you can learn to learn outside of the degree. And so that approach is extremely important. But at the end of the day, the pressure put on from industry associations, small to medium industry, and just broader industry is that we don't have enough qualified people and skilled people. So if there was anything that I would be very much advocating towards any degree that I was creating, was that there was really good industry buy-in, and at least through some sort of professional advisory board or industry advisory board, to ensure there's a pathway to get you to understand that, to get the undergraduates to understand the material, but to also be ready for that onslaught of jobs that are out there. And I think the latest figure is 600,000 that are going to be available by 20 something that are empty. And how do we solve that issue?
You definitely gave us your DDR answer. That was lovely. So with all these needs out there, what do you recommend from your perspective as Michael, and sort of what you use in your units as the way you would choose to instruct?
Well, that's a very good question. So I do remember a time, and Michael would know this well, the standard, lecture tutorial lab format, when we were there 30 years ago at Griffith University, and I'm sure there's still a lot of that sort of instruction mode around. I suppose the interesting thing that happened when I moved to UTS was that we had this thing called Learning Futures, which came down from the DDCE, so definitely not a DDR thing. It was a teaching and learning edict that was really about pushing away from traditional lectures and looking at flipped classrooms, looking at eventually morphing into removing lectures altogether, in the sense that if you had a lecture in your unit or your course, then you actually committed a devastating crime against Learning Futures 2.0. I'm being a little bit dramatic, but the reality was that the level of engagement that students are perceived to have when there's a lecture that goes for 1 to 2 hours, and I will say I am guilty of doing that. I remember I was doing a course on evolutionary neural computing, and so it's more of a high level, ready to go to honors type subject. In those days, evolutionary neural computing was huge because at the moment AI is everywhere, right? And everyone thinks they know what AI is, but so I'm inserting some DDRI stuff in here again. But what I was presenting was essentially a lecture in a lab, and so moving to UTS, that was flipped, pardon the pun. And the idea was that the instruction and the real valuable information that's extracted by the student in the unit was at the laboratory. And we then created, and it was, I can say I didn't create it, but it was under my watch as head of school, the concept of what we now have as studios. And the idea of studios, it was all about that students would be given tasks, and they were problems, and they were problems from industry, and industry was there, as part of the subject, the unit instruction. So there's no, it's not just students and a lecturer, students, a lecturer, and industry saying, here's the defined project, and there's support mechanisms to practically solve the problem within that period of time, which was a laboratory or a studio. And so the de-emphasis of lectures occurred in not entirely, but there was this concept of being able to say, put up like 5-minute snippets, of information that the students could easily digest. And I suppose you call it a lecture, but the concept was then that the majority of work was done in the practical elements of the program, and the practical elements are those. We don't really have the concept of tutorials per se, and that to me that's really exciting because the students love it, industry loves it, and really talking to the students, they're actually getting the students to work, and that aligns with the concept of practice-oriented learning, which UTS is known for. And I think as a faculty of engineering and IT, where the powerhouse of activity, biased that I am, is in the research space, but actually we adopted the teaching and learning pedagogy around, the Learning Futures concepts quite well, I think. And, it was a journey, but at the end of the day, we've now got a legacy where every school has the concept of a studio. And we thought initially that it would only be able to start in computer science, but it's now evolved across all the engineering as well. And that to me is a fantastic achievement, and it's maintained to this day.
Go ahead, Michael.
So that's interesting. That's interesting. Yeah. So I think we're pushing you towards, I put my hand up because I think we're pushing you towards this whole, what do you think of the length? So, so you're Deputy Dean, Research and Innovation. Clearly the next step is Dean of the Faculty, right? So as Dean of the Faculty in this hypothetical future world, would you put in an edict that said no lectures? Do you think we're at the point where you would say, no, we shouldn't do lectures, all of our classes should be interactive? Or is that a step too far?
I want to hybrid that question, Michael. So one of the things in the article we wrote that is our problem is this. The article said we're going to get rid of lectures in order to have Zooms, or get rid of Zoom lectures in order to do TED Talks, which to me are also lectures. And then you mentioned flip the classroom, right? So the question that he's hopping on is, are those flipped classroom activities allowed to be pre-recorded lectures? Do you support that? Where do you stand? Because in your flipped classroom, in theory, they show up for a studio, which, by the way, takes a good 3 studios before the students realize that you're not going to just do PowerPoints, right? So that transition is tough. But what we're saying is, if you're going to do that, even in that flipped with the studio, what can't you do in the flipped? Are you okay with a lecture in the flipped? Is it got to be a shorter lecture? So that's kind of using Michael's question about, are you okay with a lecture? And in addition, could I just do a one-day lecture in a studio if I felt that was super important content? Where do you feel with that kind of a tie together question?
It's a very good question. I would say that by the very nature of the edict, and also by where things have evolved naturally, that we would look at a small snippet, the permissible thing would be a small snippet of online material pre-recorded that gives some context around material. But where there is, and I would still say that even in a non-pre-recorded format, for example, during COVID time was a little bit challenging because we sort of had to flip things back in a sense, because you couldn't have people in laboratories. And so, we tried all sorts of interesting things. For example, having like one person in the laboratory live doing something in computing or engineering, and the students were looking at it, but at least it was still practical. And they could interact by putting their hands up, or, and I think a lot of universities looked at that. I think I visited Southern Cross and a few other universities that sort of adopted that during the COVID time. And I'm sure maybe you guys have done that as well. But but the principle or the precept is that you would not have a long lecture. That is not the standard. And so material can be stored online, such as documents and documentation, and the bite-sized chunks of either pre-recorded or shorter lectures are probably acceptable. But as I said, it's not 2 hours of pre-recorded material or even 2 hours of live material. It's just not engaging from our perspective, and certainly that's sort of the feedback that we've received from our students.
Awesome. So I've actually got another question for you, Michael, which is interesting, from Cal in the chat, who's saying, what about IP and intellectual property? And I've had this, right, where I've sent students off on placement and they say, I can't report on my placement because it's all confidential and my employer's worried. And I can see even if the employers that you're talking about that come to your studios maybe aren't so worried about IP because the students are just building student projects, maybe they're a little worried about talking about what happens in their business because they're worried that that's proprietary. Have you ever encountered any issues like that?
Absolutely. I mean, we do this all the time, and putting my DDRI hat on, which is not popular in this presentation, is that obviously we do NDAs and agreements with industry all the time, particularly when we just even have a chat around material that is exchanged. I just did one today with an industry partner that said, I can't get you to talk to my people until you've got an NDA in place, and that was not for teaching. But in the teaching space, we had a similar situation. In fact, before studios with industry were a real thing, we had a concept called industry studios. And there was even a business model around it. And it wasn't necessarily, free for the industry. The industry has to put some skin in the game to actually drive some of the student work. And at the end of the day, the IP generated by the students is theirs. That is the rules of most universities. That is how it works. But remember, that's if there's new, stuff generated out of a studio. But so there have been situations where, just for example, when the industry was paying for something to get a studio class to work on X, they as part of this, the arrangement, there would be NDAs in place. There might even be a conversation with the students to say, look, we really need this stuff that you're generating. Would you be amenable to, to actually sign over your IP, but through compensation, so, and it's the student's choice, and at the end of the day, they're not walking away with nothing. And this happens a lot in hackathons and things like that. You may have seen there's big industry players who are extremely rich, and they say, you're going to win $1,000 prize, and all you have to do is create this new thing which we're going to consume into our industry for $1 million. Cool, and so that's not really nice. But But the type of people we're dealing with are usually SMEs. They're themselves quite, I wouldn't, I don't want to use the word cash strapped, but they're on a, they've got a small margin, and they're trying to create innovation in any way they can. So as long, from my perspective, as long as everyone is upfront with the arrangements, and I think you have to put all these things in place, agreements, conversations with the students, give them opportunity to think about it, and to either sign up for a project that industry doesn't really care about and just wants to use it as a learning experience, or that they do care about from the IP perspective, and then there's a little bit more stringency around how that gets signed off. So yeah, we've definitely come up with models to ensure that that's all looked after from both sides.
I like that. I think, the students should be paid for the work they do is a great idea. It's very similar to what you hear about, don't offer people exposure, actually offer them money when they do things, and I think that's true for the students as well. I'm going to hand you back to Robert, see if he's got a question.
Yeah, we have another question in the chat. I'd like to really get to the chat people because they spend time, but the question was, if you're doing that flipped classroom, how are students assessed and how are students' learning outcomes measured?
Was this in the context of the industry type work? Robert, is this in the context?
I think it's in relation to the studios you said you did when you got
right. Yes, the studios, just like measure assessments and stuff.
Yeah. Okay, so I think there are multiple sort of models. There is obviously, if there's a project where there is a group of students, and obviously there usually is, then the marking will be apportioned, in terms of the outcome or the deliverable that has occurred. And it's sort of like, and to be honest, I remember going back to my Griffith days, Michael, and you'll probably be aware of this. There were these things called industry projects or projects, and the poor 30s would be dropped in the meat grinder with a industry partner who said, create this fully working application with a user interface and all the back end code. And I want it to work, properly. I think we're a little bit more nuanced about that. But the reality was, in those days, the attribution of work was given to the whole team. And so a mark would be on the basis of, whether various things. And I think there's treatment around milestones, and I think we've been doing that for years across the two universities I've been at, where there are milestones, and you have to show that you're passing milestone 1 to maybe it's the user interface, or if it's a piece of software or whatever it may be, or if it's a robotic product, maybe the prototype, and then how's that automating and working, and again, they're given ahead of time, very nicely explained as to deadlines and so forth. And so when those milestones are met, the group will get the mark, but individuals are also considered. And I think there's been a range of ways that individual participation has been measured. It's either through interaction with the individuals, with industry and the academic that is the custodian of the project, or through peer review and assessment as well. But the main thing is that it's trying to give a flavor and a feeling for the students that you're not just doing an assignment, or you're not just doing a piece of work for a university. You actually also need to impress, or at least be on the radar of the industry partner who's assigned something to you, and in good faith you've agreed to deliver something. And I think you have to be realistic of what you can deliver and what the students can deliver in a semester, or a session, whatever you want to call it. But that's why the milestones are tight and looked after and reviewed, and there's feedback provided along the way. So, so I think the assessment is literally attached, and the measures of success are attached to what would be an industry outcome for the industry partner, in a sense. But whilst at the same time having sufficient learning to try things, make mistakes, and correct those mistakes to facilitate a learning process.
That's interesting. I think that's useful. Michelle was the one that asked the question. I guess she teaches sort of basic digital skills and digital competencies, and so maybe she's sort of going, oh, how does this work in this situation where you're giving the kids a free for all. You know, you're sort of going into a room and you're saying to the kids, you know, here's an industry project, do what you want. And I guess she's visualizing these quite diverse kind of products that the students are producing. But what I'm hearing from you is that it's more about assessing the process than it is about assessing the product, right? You know, team A might produce this really awesome app and team T might be a bit more basic, but as long as they've kind of followed that process, worked well with the industry, with that.
Absolutely. And to be honest, I would say that although the studio model is a little bit different because it's very much a lot more hands-on on campus, and that's the other thing I forgot to mention is that the Learning Futures, prescription was around ensuring there was a sticky campus and you had students. So this opening up of students post-COVID is the best thing that could ever happen because students want to be here and they want to interact with themselves and with industry. So I just wanted to highlight that point. But yeah, it was that. Look, I think you'd see a trend that most universities would also take that, sort of approach around process. Even in the old days of industry projects or student projects, whatever you want to call them, where you sometimes it was really interesting. You had, say, this top group, all the HD students who would get into a group together, and the expectations was, they're going to deliver an actual product out of this, and they're going to be the best team. We're going to put them up for awards, and they may not, because they may not know how to work together, and teamwork isn't properly done because they're all got their own agendas, and then it falls apart. So you're going to have instances where, what's coming out of that has to be measured by what can be achieved by the individuals. And you've got problems along the way, people getting sick, people, not contributing. You've got to do X and the person's out, for the count and they can't find him or her. And then all of a sudden the project stalls. And so, you have to take it in the context of how the students work, what the students are working on. And so the process definitely, but that's not to say you're not hoping for an outcome that can be showcased, can be put to a industry showcase later. So to give you an example, last year we created this thing, one of our lecturers created a AI showcase. So all the AI projects that were developed, some with industry, some not, were showcased face-to-face. This was right before, I think, Omicron hit. And, industry was there and people were presented with awards and things. And, some of the stuff was very impressive, and so, but all of it had its own context, and some were more impressive, but some were, perceptibly less, but the process may have been the same because there was a lot of effort put in, and it just that the students had a challenge. And that's the other thing, learning from mistakes, learning from challenges, overcoming those, communicating with themselves and the industry partner, and also the academic in charge.
I went to a presentation this morning and somebody else said this idea that if you stretch the students, sometimes you'd be surprised what you get. And I like that. I think that's a good message. And also the other thing I want to say, I'm going to ask you a question in a second, but something I learned, I know I'm stealing from Robert, I apologize.
I was going to say.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to mention just really briefly is I love coming to these kinds of things, talking to somebody like you from UTS, because something I learned 20 odd years ago is that you go to conferences and everybody says the same things about their students, regardless of where they're from, right? And so I think we often get listening to you talk about your students and some of them disappearing from the groups and various other things. It doesn't really matter whether you're in Central Queensland or in Sydney, students are always the same, right?
It's life, right? It's life. And you can't, students all have their own, and this is the other thing to be cognizant of, is that students have their own lives outside. And what I found was absolutely fascinating when I'm coming to UTS was that when I was at Griffith, on the Gold Coast, we actually had to help students who really wanted to excel outside of class, who wanted some experience around, playing with real stuff or having interaction with industry beyond their own degree. And there seemed to have been students who had more time in those days. And you may recall, Michael, we created this thing called the App Factory, which Joel and Fakeney ran and was established through the school when I was there. And it was really awesome because there was literally students creating apps outside of their own time, but there were these amazing students who just wanted to do more. What I found weird coming to UTS, so there is a difference, and it's sometimes very subtle. I tried to run a similar model here and it failed abysmally. And one of the reasons is because the students were already employed elsewhere without my help, without anyone's help in the university. You know, it's like, so you can imagine that, and I'm not talking about flipping burgers work. I'm talking about actual work with industry startups. And so, you know, I'm very happy for them, but, you know, the bridge that I wanted to offer from the past could no longer be offered because they were already busy. And so we just have to be cognizant that everyone has busy lives, industry stuff or employment or, you know, personal things. So that's the thing that you know is consistent with all students. They've got their own lives, and you have to.
You're doing a good job selling Robert on sending his teenage son to UTS.
Well, I'm also going to add, like, socially, all students are the same, but cognitively they're not, and what they know they're not. My favorite scene is the scene from The Social Network, where Zuckerberg looks just like every student in his programming class, and the professor's trying to act all high and mighty. This is how you do this, right? And he's thinking about Facebook.
Yeah.
And as he gets up to walk out, the professor goes, you know, you're going to have to do this. And he tells him the answer.
Yeah.
Right. And then he goes, well, the rest of you are going to have to learn this. And the argument that my students socially respond to me the same way everybody else does, because he doesn't look like he knows more than anyone else in the room. No. Because socially, everybody's the same, but cognitively, they're different. And socially, a child who says, I don't know how to do that, however, was previously taught it and is having to remember it, they're now relearning it, versus somebody who says, I don't know how to do that, was never taught it and has to learn it a first time. They're not the same people, but that's a sidebar.
Absolutely.
I just want to make sure that we don't use student reactions in social environments to be the same as a representation, because nobody really wants to do work, whether they're 30 or 15 or 80, right? But so what they're doing is taking a role.
Well, it's definitely different to one of my daughters that Michael presented on the screen before. She loves to work, you know, and she lives to work, and at school. So it's not uni, but it's at school. And I think, you know, there are those students, as I said, and I don't mean working outside. I'm talking about working on schoolwork or whether it's university work. So even then, you've got people who have different motivations. They're trying to prove a point. They want to excel for their parents. They want to, you know, get a good job at the end. You know, so you got to look at the motivations for people as well. And some people are not cognitively the same, but they put in a whole lot more effort because they want to achieve a goal. And so the variety is quite astounding. And I like that aspect of it. I think it's interesting.
Now, I want to go back to a comment somebody made and back to our sort of lecture, non-lecture, right? Because I'm a Vygotskian. And, you know, eliminating a lecture in a whole group scenario actually debunks Vygotskian theory, right? Because Vygotskian theory is I'm a more knowledgeable person guiding people through, right? And so my argument would be, okay, go out, make a video of data normalization in database design, satisfying 1NF, 2NF, 3NF, 4NF, and just because there's an argument that what you're really doing is creating a better class disparity. The higher achieving students that can read that and follow it are really benefiting. They come in, they get it, but the students who read it and don't understand it, when you go, hey, let's do a question, let's ask questions, they're not doing anything because they're scared to admit they don't know it. The ones that already know it don't need help. And so there's an argument that somebody made saying, well, if you're charismatic, you can still do a longer lecture. And if you want to be scaffolding, right? Because you can't scaffold in a Zoom, right? And some concepts are not innately. Now, the reason Byron's going, what? The reason why I'm arguing you can't scaffold in a Zoom is because you have to know the place at which each individual needs to be scaffolded. Because you don't know where they are in the video, you might assume where they are, but you don't actually know where each student struggles until they have an interaction with you in a Zoom. Well, I said a Zoom, but I meant a recording Zoom. Sorry, Byron, thank you for clarifying. But I meant a recording Zoom, like you were talking about a flipped classroom. Because I do a flipped classroom, but one of the problems I find is when they come to my classroom, sometimes what really happens is people that know the answers already don't ask questions, and people that are struggling don't ask questions. And it creates this unbalanced thing. Whereas I think if I was teaching the class, I could watch faces, do things, and I could push them to ask questions. I could push an interaction. Where's your feeling on that part, right? Because I know it's going to sound like a long question. I'm okay with saying, let's minimize lectures, but some universities have forbidden lectures. And I worry that that's going to put a strangle on a scaffolding and not allow me to do that. Now, obviously, every single lecture is bad, but where do you feel about that?
Yeah, look, I think it's an interesting question, and I actually agree with that comment around the fact that some, I think it was Paul in the chat, that a skilled actor can sustain a monologue for over an hour. I would say, that I probably felt like that skilled actor when I was doing my classes back at Griffith, thinking I was really brilliant. And I was holding everyone in the palm of my hands. And yet, it was not always easy, particularly with a class at the time of between 300 to 400 students in a lecture theatre, for me to really be able to know everyone's face and reaction to things. And then, as you say, if they know it, they won't ask the question. If they don't know it, they're scared to ask the question. And the ones then that would prefer not to ask things in front of 400 people will then come see you after class or come during consultation. And the other problem with the skilled actor argument is that most academics aren't skilled actors, I've tried things in my past university where there were challenges around getting, lecturers to engage with students to actually even think of taking them to professional acting classes, and they looked on it as professional development. But there's some people that will just never be an engaging actor, and you've got to then have a thought about what do you do in those circumstances. I would then also argue that
but just to share that, heaven forbid we just have different procedures for different lecturers opposed to just a general no one can, right? What happened to going in and watching people and giving them advice and help? Like, my problem is just that sanctioned, no one can do this, period. And
and that's why, I would say that I think we didn't really land on a hard line at UTS. It's just expected. And at the end of the day, you can look at people's faces within the software studios. You can look at them within practical work that's assigned outside of lectures. You can also look at reactions these days electronically through medium, the different types of media that aren't face-to-face. And the problem is that some of those things, some of the students in this new fangled world of digital technology actually prefer engagement through digital means. And so I think we just have to, so I agree with you. I mean, there should be a variety of approaches. And I don't think, I would say that, there's nowhere on our UTS stuff that says lectures are banned, but we would say that there are different approaches, and some of which are more practically oriented and engaging through a different mode. And I think that, you have to be wary that the complement of, say, a small short video or a short lecture that's complemented with digital interaction and then face-to-face practical interaction in class can be pretty powerful. So I suppose it's horses for courses, but I do think that the traditional approach to lecturing cannot survive forever. That's my feeling.
Interesting. We to be fair, you've destroyed our ability to get a hot take out of you. I'm very disappointed. We were hoping that after this we could say, famous deputy dean at UTS says that, but we can't. So but to be fair, the university that Robert is getting all spicy about is not UTS. It's actually a little bit further north. But they did actually say no more lectures. They forbid lectures at their university.
Well, I also have to be slightly candid. So I've published a recent research chapter in Working Research. I know deep embedded actions of the Will Project at UTS with Keith Haggard. We are all doing research, gathering data. So I did want to, I let other people chime in, but earlier when he was talking about business interactions, I've got actual data of his business interactions that is working quite well at UTS with their work integrated learning factors stuff that they have going on. But he does it know that I'm writing papers with
There you
Keith
go.
politics and Dean in his area. You know, even as DDR, you know, you would
Fine.
think, but you know.
So I've got one more question for you, Michael, and then I think Robert's going to throw the TELCoP 10 at you. We might sneak in one more though. So I'm going to kind of riff on a question that Byron had in the chat about asynchronous learning, and you mentioned horses. And what I was going to say is there a situation where students are like that mythical horse that you can lead to the water, but you can't make them drink? And I guess what Byron's worried about in the chat is that idea that students, given the opportunity to engage digitally, as you suggested, right, in a flip model, watch those short videos beforehand, might not actually engage with that material because they don't realize what's good for them, as it were, and because of that, the engagement overall is going to continue to decrease. Now, obviously, as a technology enhanced learning person, and you're the same, a computer scientist, right? We would all love that technology will make everything awesome, right? Better. Is there an argument there that the digital is not so good if it's reducing that engagement? Byron's got a side to add before you answer. You can if you want, Byron.
Yeah, sorry guys. Look, my main thing is, and I'm no Luddite, believe me. I was doing my master's in early 2000s on what we call computer assisted language learning back then. So I'm right on board with this stuff, but I like to play devil's advocate. And what I'm seeing increasingly, it's not so much whether it's the digital delivery, it's the move from live to asynchronous, where all the students are now, and it is, yeah, it's a little bit of a result of COVID. All the students are now thinking, I'll just catch up on the video. Last night, I had 2 students leave a live session because they found out that, yeah, the recording will be available tomorrow. So that's better for me, you know, and it's just, I don't know, we're getting really poor numbers in a lot of situations.
Yeah, look, I think that's a very good point you raise. And I think, you know, my theory on this is that if you use digital in a way that, and look, I'm a big believer in, and this was in the old days, I'm a big believer in assessment-driven learning, okay? Which means that at the end of the day, whoever is in your class, one thing, unless they really don't care about their marks, one thing that they all care about is assessment. And my view is, you know, I think the digital elements should have breadcrumbs of information that will ensure that they have to visit that information to do the assessment. And however you present it, I don't have anything in mind that I'm thinking in my head, but whatever it is, you know, if it's just a recording of something someone's done, and you say, oh, this is going to be posted, you know, so everyone just goes, well, I'm checking out of this lecture. But what happens if you say, well, it'll be posted, but I'm also going to release some other information that you need to have a look at, and it's going to be essential to work to use that to actually, you know, work on your assessment and you know, enhance your learning. So, I mean, it's a bit sneaky, but I think it's you've got to also look at the motivations of students, you know, and they, you know, I remember having a classmate who, you know, if it didn't work, you know, this is in my own era, right, which was, as Michael's pointed out, was in 1950, right? So you know, I mean, he would not, especially he didn't care if it was anything above a pass. He just wanted to pass, and he always just wanted to do the bare minimum, but would always do the work, which was you know, and consume the information that was very important for completing the work to get assessed appropriately. So I'm not saying that's the solution. I'm saying it's one approach where you use digital cleverly, and you definitely don't put it up there as the, you know, solution to everything, but rather you use it to, you know, in a way that enhances student learning, but also potentially enhances, you know, how they find things to solve problems and to solve assessment.
And just to share that it's not any different. I don't know, being American, if you've watched the movie Real Genius, right, where the student shows up to the university, the first class, all the students there, shows up the second class, there's a bunch of tape recording students recording the lecture from the professor, and then he shows up later, and then there's a reel-to-reel lecture from the professor with nothing but tape recorders recording it, right? So this is not anything new. I mean, I remember going to college, and as weeks go along, students stop showing up in classrooms, right? So we're acting like all of a sudden digital's different, and it's not. The professor's job is to think that through, but this has always been a problem. Not showing up is nothing new.
Yep. Yep, it's true.
Yeah.
Agreed. I just get the feeling, and again, maybe COVID, blah, blah, blah. We're almost like students are expecting just YouTubes, you know, and almost sometimes I feel like I'm becoming a YouTube video creator instead of an actual teacher in a classroom.
And I would argue in the 80s, those professors felt like they were actually TV shows, right? Like in reality, it's not that much different.
Byron,
But I agree.
Byron, have you considered Snapchat or TikTok?
Yeah, there you go. I know YouTube is showing your age.
I know.
My daughter calls me a boomer because I talk
Yeah.
about Facebook, you know. And
There you go.
and she
That's
doesn't
right.
even know what boomer means, you know, but she says I'm a
Yeah.
boomer.
Even though you're way younger than a boomer.
Yeah, exactly.
There's our hot take, Professor.
Yes.
UTS.
Professor
We all
Boomer.
use TikTok to deliver our classes. I think that's our hot take.
So
So
I'm gonna.
UPS is on TikTok now.
Oh, there you go.
It's not necessarily from a teaching perspective. It's more of a interactive, let's have, you know, get the students engaged, you know, and to be honest, you know, I suspect it'll be the same as most things where people go to the material initially, no one updates it, and then it just, you know, trails off. But you know, I think universities are thinking that way. How do you engage the new generation in a more meaningful way with what they're used to?
Yeah. So here is our TELCoP top 10. So we got to get them, so we get them in the 3 minutes, which easily happens. So number 1, what is your favorite technology word?
My favorite technology word,
Yes.
Yeah, short, sharp answers for these.
AI.
This is like quick
AI.
10.
AI. Nice, nice. What is your least favorite technology word?
Moodle.
Mood.
Well, do you want to
Nice.
build on that? Do you give us a set? Why Moodle or LMSs?
I'm just not a big fan of paying big exorbitant amounts to you know, learning platforms.
Oh, okay. What technology gets you excited?
I think any technology that exhibits more closely the you know, interactions and features of a human being.
Okay, cool. What technology turns you off?
Anyone that says they hate AI because it's going to destroy the world, Skynet style.
Maybe that's a good one. What technology, sound, or noise do you love?
This one sometimes catches people.
Nothing, anything that that comes out of my iPhone.
Oh, anything that comes out of your iPhone. Okay, that might be nice for this next one. What technology, sound, or noise do you hate?
I hate the technology noise. This is unfortunately an old school answer. When it sounds like your hard drive is just grinded and is dying, it's probably the most scariest thing you could ever hear in your life.
Nice.
This is old school stuff. So you're listening
Yeah.
from the 90s, they'll not even
Look,
know.
it's just showing your age. No
I
worries.
love
No
it.
worries.
That click, click, click that a hard drive makes just before it dies. I think that's the best answer we've ever had. For the loved one, people often mention the modem noise, that noise of getting online.
Oh, that was not a like one because I remember waiting for hours to try and get things to load.
Yeah.
It's the worst experience I had.
Yeah. What is your favorite technology slang word?
Technology slang word. I don't know. To be honest, I can't think of a technology slang word off the top of my head. I'm consuming too much bandwidth here, but I don't like it when people shorten or abbreviate any technology names. You know what I mean? So for example, you know, I mean, Mac is not such a bad one, but you know what I mean? I do not like abbreviations of technology. I think they should be in their full glory.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Well, that is why I was specific on focusing on that question about being a skilled actor, because when I was a child, I did speech and drama and theatre, and I wanted to be an actor. So that's why I thought of myself as a great lecturer. But the truth is in the pudding, isn't it? Or
Yeah.
I'm not in a Hollywood blockbuster, regrettably. So,
What profession would you really not like to do?
being a lawyer. I think this country has got a lot of lawyers, and the other problem I find is that the law profession, although helpful in some circumstances, likes to be very active in technology, and you've got non-experts in technology trying to put laws and regulations up without proper consultation and input from the techies, and I really find that an affront to our field.
Finally, if you get to technology, if technology heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Although it wasn't well cited when you were on Earth, I actually thought your AI was the best.
So
I think
that,
that's probably the most academic answer we've ever.
yes.
Sorry, DDRI. Sorry.
Awesome.
Yes. You have survived our TELCoP 10. That is a wrap up. We're 2 minutes over. So that is a wrap up of our session. Thank you all for attending. The next one is going to be a session with Daryl Clary doing some training for us, because the last one, people requested a little bit of technology training. So that should be our next one. We'll be sending you out a message soon.
Thank you so much for your time, Michael. And yeah, you can take off your L&T hat now and put your DDR and I hat back on.
Thank you both. Really appreciate it. Thanks to everyone who listened.
Michael, you can stop the recording.
I'll stop the recording.